Billionaire entered the hospital room furious until his ex-wife with newborn twins said, "You're the father." Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damon Vexley's corner office on the 32nd floor of Vexley Pharmaceuticals. At 38, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. 6'2" with broad shoulders that filled his custom-tailored charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was styled with precision, not a strand out of place, and his steel-gray eyes held the kind of focus that had built a billion-dollar empire before most men hit 40. Damon's fingers moved across his laptop keyboard with mechanical efficiency, reviewing quarterly projections that would determine the fate of 3 research facilities. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't leave. Numbers made sense. Unlike his marriage, 7 months, that's how long it had been since Sylvie walked out of their Tribeca penthouse with nothing but 2 suitcases and a look in her hazel eyes that he still couldn't decode. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, but Damon knew the real reason was simpler. He had never learned to speak her language. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number." "Damon Vexley," he answered, not looking up from his screen. "She was admitted to Mount Sinai Hospital about 2 hours ago." The voice was unfamiliar. "Female, urgent, room 203. You need to come now." Who is this? Who was admitted? But the line was already dead. Damon stared at the phone, his jaw tightening. After months of Sylvia ignoring his calls, refusing to meet about their shared properties, now this, some dramatic hospital stunt to force his hand in the final divorce proceedings. He'd seen this playbook before in his business dealings. Manufactured urgency to gain leverage. He grabbed his keys and coat, anger building with each step toward the elevator. If Sylvie thought she could manipulate him with whatever scheme this was, she had seriously miscalculated. The drive through Manhattan's evening traffic gave him time to build his case. Maybe she'd orchestrated some minor accident to delay the property settlement. Maybe she needed money and thought a hospital scare would soften his resolve. The Sylvie he'd married 3 years ago wouldn't have played games like this. But people changed. People left. Mount Sinai's sterile hallways smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. Damon's Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floors as he found the elevator, his anger sharpening with each passing floor. Second floor, maternity ward. His steps slowed. Maternity room 203 was at the end of a quiet corridor lined with soft lighting and motivational posters about new beginnings. Through the partially open door, he could see a figure in the hospital bed, and his breath caught in his throat. Sylvie. She looked smaller than he remembered, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. Her usually bright complexion was pale, almost translucent, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion deeper than sleep could cure. She wore a simple hospital gown, but even in that sterile environment, there was something luminous about her. And then he saw them, 2 tiny bundles, one cradled in each of her arms, newborn so small they seemed almost fragile, their little faces peaceful in sleep. The baby on her left had dark hair like his own. The one on her right had Sylvie's button nose. Damon's hand froze on the door handle. His mind, usually so quick to calculate and assess, went completely blank. Sylvie looked up and met his eyes. No tears, no drama, no manipulation. Just that same direct gaze that had first captivated him at a medical conference for years ago when she'd challenged his presentation on pharmaceutical accessibility with the kind of intelligence that made his pulse quicken. "Before you say anything," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious fatigue, "you should know the truth." She shifted slightly, adjusting her hold on the babies with the kind of natural grace that suggested she'd been doing this for more than the few hours they'd been alive. "You're their father, Damon." The words hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white against the pale wood. The man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, who had testified before Congress, who had never met a problem he couldn't solve with logic and determination, found himself completely speechless. One of the babies stirred, making a soft sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence between them. Sylvie's hand moved instinctively to soothe the child, and in that gesture, Damon saw a version of the woman he'd married, the one who'd always known how to heal things he didn't even realize were broken. "Twins," she added quietly, as if the word itself might shatter something precious. "Born 3 hours ago, 7 weeks early, but they're strong." Damon took a step into the room, then another, drawn forward by something he couldn't name. Up close, he could see the resemblance more clearly. The baby boy had his strong jawline. The girl had Sylvie's delicate features, but his determined expression, even in sleep. How long have you known? His voice came out rougher than intended. Sylv's eyes never left his face. I found out 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I wanted to tell you, but she trailed off. But he could fill in the blanks. How many times had he dismissed her dreams of having a family? How many conversations about children had he redirected to work, to logic, to all the reasons why their lives were too complicated for that kind of responsibility? But I made it clear that fatherhood wasn't in my plans, he finished for her. She nodded, a small movement that somehow conveyed years of hurt. I couldn't risk them growing up feeling unwanted. Not by you. The accusation hung in the air between them, gentle but devastating. Damon looked down at the babies, his children, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. These weren't projections or quarterly reports. This wasn't a problem to be solved or a deal to be negotiated. This was real. This was his. What kind of man walks away from his own children? What would you do if you discovered you were a father to twins you never knew existed? Damon remained frozen in the doorway, his expensive watch ticking away seconds that felt like hours. The soft beeping of medical equipment and distant sounds of the hospital corridor seemed muted compared to the thundering of his own heartbeat. May I? He started, then cleared his throat. May I come closer? Sylvie studied his face for a long moment before nodding. Close the door first. They've been through enough without strangers gawking. He did as she asked, his movements careful and deliberate. When he turned back, Sylvia was watching him with those perceptive hazel eyes that had always seen too much. Even exhausted and vulnerable, she possessed a quiet strength that had first drawn him to her at that medical conference when she'd stood up in a room full of pharmaceutical executives and challenged his entire presentation with research he hadn't even considered. Their names, he said, approaching the bed slowly. Do they have names? Lucas and Emma. Sylvie's voice softened as she looked down at the sleeping infants. Lucas, James, and Emma Rose. James. Damon's step faltered. That had been his father's name, a detail Sylvia remembered from one of their rare conversations about family during their brief marriage. He should know where he comes from, she said simply, even if she didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between them. Even if you're not going to be part of his life. Damon reached the edge of the bed, close enough now to see the delicate rise and fall of their tiny chests. Lucas shifted in his sleep, his small fist uncurling to reveal miniature fingers that looked remarkably like Damon's own hands, just impossibly small. Emma made a soft sound, her rosebud mouth forming what almost looked like a smile. They're so small, he whispered more to himself than to Sylvie. 5 pounds 2 ounces each. The doctors say they're doing well for 33 weeks. Sylvia adjusted her position carefully, trying not to disturb them. A small wed features, and Damon noticed the foreline in her arm, the monitors tracking her vital signs. Are you okay? I mean medically. Complicated delivery, she said but I'm fine. We're all fine. The casual way she said it belied the terror he was beginning to imagine. Sylvia alone in this hospital. No one to hold her hand or advocate for her during what must have been the most frightening experience of her life. You did this alone. It wasn't a question. Sylvia met his gaze directly. I had Dr. Martinez, an excellent nursing staff, and I've been taking care of myself for a long time now. Damon. It's not exactly new. The quiet rebuke hit its mark. Even during their marriage, he'd been absent more often than present. Board meetings in Geneva, acquisition trips to Tokyo, conferences that he'd convinced himself were crucial for their future. Their future. As if Sylvie had ever asked for the penthouse or the private jet or any of the material things he'd used to justify his absence. I would have come, he said, if I'd known. Would you? Sylv's question was gentle but pointed. Really? Or would you have tried to convince me that the timing wasn't right, that we should wait until after the Singapore merger, or until you'd finished restructuring the European division? Damon opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because she was right. The Damon of 7 months ago would have done exactly that. Would have treated pregnancy like a business complication to be managed rather than a miracle to be celebrated. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. A woman in scrubs peered in. Dr. Martinez. According to her badge, she was in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Sorry to interrupt. I'm Dr. Martinez, Sylvie's obstetrician. She looked between them with professional discretion. I wanted to check on our new family and discuss some logistics. Dr. Martinez, this is Damon, Sylvie said carefully, the baby's father. If the doctor was surprised by this late introduction, she didn't show it. Mr. Vexley, Damon Vexley. He extended his hand, falling automatically into business mode. Mr. Vexley, I'm glad you're here. Sylv's been remarkable through this whole process, but having support is important during recovery. Dr. Martinez moved to check Sylvie's chart on the tablet at the foot of the bed. The twins will need to stay in the NICU for observation, probably another week or two. Their lungs are developing beautifully, but we want to monitor them closely. NICU. Damon felt something cold settle in his stomach. Neonatal intensive care unit, Sylvia explained, seeing his confusion. It's standard for premature babies. They're not in danger, just extra precautions. They're strong babies, Dr. Martinez added reassuringly, but born at 33 weeks, they need specialized care. Feeding tubes for now, temperature regulation, monitoring, nothing unusual for their gestational age. Damon looked down at Lucas and Emma, so tiny and perfect in Sylvie's arms, and the full weight of what Sylvia had been carrying alone hit him like a freight train. Not just the physical demands of pregnancy and premature labor, but the emotional burden of every doctor's appointment, every worry, every decision made in solitude. What does she need? He asked Dr. Martinez. What do they need? Rest, primarily. Sylvie delivered via emergency C-section, so she'll be here for at least 3 more days. The babies will be moved to the NICU within the hour for monitoring. Dr. Martinez glanced at her tablet. After discharge, she'll need help at home. Newborn twins are challenging under the best circumstances. She won't be alone, Damon heard himself say. I'll make sure of that. Sylvia looked up at him sharply, surprise flickering across her features. Damon, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm, certain in a way that surprised even him. These are my children, too. Dr. Martinez smiled. Excellent. I'll leave you 3 to talk. Sylvie, try to rest. The next few weeks are going to be an adjustment for everyone. After the doctor left, silence settled over the room again. Sylvie was studying Damon's face with an expression he couldn't quite read. You said you'd make sure I wasn't alone, she said carefully. What does that mean, exactly? Damon pulled the visitor's chair closer to the bed and sat down, bringing himself to eye level with his ex-wife and the children, and he was still struggling to believe were real. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I know I can't walk out of this room and pretend this didn't happen. I can't go back to quarterly reports and board meetings and act like I don't have 2 children who need me. Need you for what? Sylv's voice carried a note of old hurt. Money, support checks, a trust fund. No. Damon reached toward Lucas, then stopped, his hand hovering uncertainly over the sleeping baby. May I? Sylvie hesitated, then carefully transferred Lucas into Damon's arms. The baby felt impossibly light and warm, his small body fitting perfectly in the crook of Damon's elbow. Lucas opened his eyes, dark blue like Sylvie's, and seemed to study his father's face with serious concentration. Hello, Lucas, Damon whispered, his voice rougher than intended. I'm sorry I'm late. When he looked up, Sylvie was watching them with tears gathering in her eyes. But before she could speak, the door opened again, and 2 NICU nurses entered with a specialized transport incubator. Time to move the babies, one of them announced cheerfully. They're going to love their new digs in the NICU. As they prepared to transfer Lucas and Emma, Damon felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. These strangers were taking his children away, and every instinct in his body rebelled against it. How often can we visit them? He asked. Parents can visit any time, the nurse replied. 24/7, access parents. The word hit him like a revelation. He was a parent, and for the first time in his adult life, Damon Vexley had absolutely no idea what he was doing. 3 hours later, Damon stood in the NICU staring through the transparent walls of 2 tiny incubators. Lucas and Emma lay under warming lights, connected to monitors that tracked every breath, every heartbeat. The steady beeping had become a strange comfort, proof that they were fighting, surviving, thriving. Despite their early arrival into the world, he'd sent his driver home and dismissed the 3 urgent calls from his CFO about the Amsterdam acquisition. For the first time in his career, billion-dollar deals felt insignificant compared to the rise and fall of 2 tiny chests. You can touch them through the porthole openings, said Jennifer, the night nurse who'd been patiently answering his questions for the past hour. She was in her 30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of calm, competence that probably came from years of helping panicked new parents. Babies need human contact, even premature ones. Damon carefully slipped his hands through the openings of Lucas's incubator. His son's skin was impossibly soft, warm, and delicate. When Damon's finger brushed against Lucas's palm, the baby's tiny hand instinctively gripped it with surprising strength. "He knows you're his dad," Jennifer observed quietly. "Babies can sense these things." How? Damon's voice was barely above a whisper. "Voice recognition, scent, touch. They've been hearing you for months, even if you didn't know it." She moved to check Emma's monitors. Sylvia talked to them constantly during her appointments, told them about their father, about how smart he was, how hard he worked, how much he cared about helping people through his research. Damon's throat tightened. Even after their divorce, even carrying his children alone, Sylvie had spoken of him with kindness to their babies. The generosity of it humbled him. She never mentioned feeling sick, morning sickness, fatigue. Jennifer glanced at him with surprise. "You really didn't know? We've been divorced for 7 months. We haven't spoken since the papers were signed." "Ah." Jennifer's expression softened with understanding. "Well, she had a tough first trimester, severe morning sickness that lasted well into the second trimester, and working full-time as a physical therapist while pregnant with twins." She shook her head. "That woman is made of steel." Physical therapist. Damon realized with shame that he'd never even asked what Sylvie was doing for work after their separation. He'd assumed she was living off the generous settlement, but of course she wasn't. Sylvie had always been too independent, too proud to rely on money she felt she hadn't earned. "Where does she work?" "Riverside Rehabilitation Center in Brooklyn. She specializes in pediatric physical therapy, works with kids who have developmental delays, injuries, neurological conditions." Jennifer smiled. "The kids adore her. She has this way of making therapy feel like play." Children, of course. Sylvie worked with children. It made perfect sense. Her patience, her intuitive understanding of what people needed, her ability to find hope in difficult situations. She'd probably been preparing for motherhood in ways he'd never recognized. Emma stirred in her incubator, making soft sounds that tugged at something deep in Damon's chest. He moved to her side and slipped his hands through the portholes. She was smaller than Lucas, more delicate, but when she felt his touch, her breathing seemed to settle into a more peaceful rhythm. "Hello." Emma rose. He whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you." "The first few weeks are crucial for bonding," Jennifer said, making notes on their charts. "Premature babies especially benefit from consistent contact with parents, skin-to-skin contact, talking to them, reading to them. It all helps with development." "Reading to them? Absolutely. It's about the sound of your voice, the rhythm of language. Studies show it improves cognitive development." She paused, studying his face. "You look like a man who's done a lot of reading in his life." Damon almost smiled. "Business journals, medical research, financial reports, nothing that would interest babies. You'd be surprised. The content doesn't matter as much as consistency. They just want to hear their parents." The word parents still felt foreign in his mouth, but less terrifying than it had a few hours ago. Watching Lucas and Emma in their incubators, so small but so determined to thrive, Damon felt something shift in his understanding of strength. They were fighting battles he couldn't fight for them, showing courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Mr. Vexley, a young resident, appeared at his elbow. "I'm Dr. Phillips, the pediatric resident on duty tonight. I wanted to update you on the twins' progress." "Please." Damon reluctantly withdrew his hands from Emma's incubator. "They're both doing remarkably well for 33 weeks. Lucas is 4 heavier, which is typical. Boys often develop faster in youth. Emma's showing excellent neurological responses. Their lungs are developing on schedule. And if they continue at this pace, we could be looking at discharge in 10 to 14 days. And then Damon realized he had no idea what came after hospital discharge. Where would Sylvie take them? How would she manage 2 newborns alone? Then they go home and start their real lives. Dr. Phillips said with a smile, "Though I should warn you, twins are exponentially more challenging than single babies. Feeding schedules, sleep deprivation, constant monitoring. Most parents feel completely overwhelmed for the first few months. Most parents, as if it were a given that both parents would be present and participating." "Dr. Phillips," Damon said carefully, "what would you recommend for a father who's just learned about his children's existence?" The young doctor didn't seem fazed by the question. "Honestly, jump in with both feet. Take the parenting classes the hospital offers. Learn to change diapers, prepare bottles, recognize signs of distress, and most importantly, support the mother. She's been through physical and emotional trauma, and she's going to need help. After Dr. Phillips left, Damon remained in the NICU, alternating between Lucas and Emma's incubators. Jennifer had given him a book about premature infant care, and he found himself reading passages aloud to them about nutrition and development milestones. His voice felt rusty at first, uncertain, but gradually settled into a rhythm that seemed to soothe all three of them. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Sylvia appeared, moving slowly and carefully in a hospital robe and slippers. Her face was pale, but determined. "You shouldn't be walking around," he said, immediately moving to her side. "Didn't Dr. Martinez say bed rest?" "I couldn't sleep." Sylv's eyes went straight to the incubators. "I needed to see them. They're doing well. Dr. Phillips says they're ahead of schedule for their gestational age. They're fighters." Sylvie's voice carried fierce pride. "They've been fighting since the day I found out about them." She moved to Lucas's incubator, slipping her hands through the portholes with practiced ease. Her touch was confident, maternal, and Damon realized she'd probably been visiting them regularly since their birth, learning their needs, establishing routines he knew nothing about. "You've been here all evening," she observed, not looking at him. "I couldn't leave the Amsterdam deal." Damon was surprised. She remembered. During their marriage, she'd listened patiently to his descriptions of complex negotiations, even when he knew the details bored her. "Postponed indefinitely." "I don't know yet." He watched her gentle movements with Lucas, the way she seemed to instinctively know exactly how much pressure to apply, where to touch to comfort him. "I'm still figuring things out." Sylvie finally looked at him, and in the soft lighting of the NICU, he could see the exhaustion in her features, but also something else. Hope maybe, or just relief that she wasn't facing this alone anymore. "Damon," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something. I didn't keep this from you to hurt you. I kept it from you because I was afraid you'd try to do the right thing for all the wrong reasons." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was terrified you'd offer to remarry me out of obligation or throw money at the situation to make it more manageable, or treat them like a problem that needed solving rather than children who needed loving." Her voice was steady but vulnerable. "I couldn't bear the thought of them growing up feeling like mistakes you had to fix." The words hit him like physical blows because they contained too much truth. The Damon she divorced absolutely would have approached unexpected fatherhood like a merger, analyzing risks, minimizing complications, managing outcomes. And now, he asked. Emma chose that moment to open her eyes, looking directly at him through the transparent wall. Sylvia followed his gaze and smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since walking into that hospital room. "Now," she said softly, "I'm hoping you'll prove me wrong." Day 3 in the hospital brought unexpected visitors. Damon had just finished reading a Wall Street Journal article to Lucas and Emma, their newest bedtime story, according to Jennifer, when he heard familiar voices in the hallway outside the NICU. "I don't care what the security desk says, I'm going up there." The voice belonged to Isabella Chen, Sylvie's best friend and fellow physical therapist. "She's been radio silent for 3 days, and that's not like her." "Ma'am, visiting ours," a security guard protested. "I'm family," Isabella declared with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Damon smiled despite himself. He remembered Isabella from their wedding, a petite powerhouse with sharp wit and fierce loyalty to Sylvie. She'd never quite warmed to him during the marriage, sensing perhaps what Sylvie had been too kind to voice, that he was better with spreadsheets than human emotions. He intercepted them at the NICU entrance. Isabella stopped short when she saw him, her dark eyes widening with surprise, before narrowing with suspicion. "Damon," she looked him up and down, taking in his rumpled dress shirt, the same one he'd been wearing for 2 days, and his uncharacteristically disheveled appearance. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting my children." The words came out more naturally than they had 3 days ago, but Isabella's expression shifted to complete shock. "You're what now?" "Perhaps we should talk somewhere more private," Damon suggested, glancing at the security guard who was listening with obvious interest. 20 minutes later, they sat in the hospital cafeteria, Isabella Damon and Marcus Rivera, Isabella's husband and Sylv's former neighbor. Marcus was a construction foreman with calloused hands and a gentle demeanor that balanced Isabella's fire perfectly. "Twins," Isabella repeated for the 3rd time, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. "Sylvia had twins." "You're twins, and you had no idea." "None," Damon confirmed. "But the morning sickness," Isabella caught herself, pressing her lips together. "You knew." Damon felt something cold settle in his stomach. Isabella exchanged a look with Marcus. We suspected she was exhausted all the time, kept canceling plans, wouldn't drink wine anymore. But when we asked, she said she was just stressed about starting her new job. New job, at Riverside Rehabilitation, Marcus said quietly. She started there right after your divorce was finalized. Pediatric physical therapy. The pay was good, benefits were excellent, perfect for someone planning to support a family alone. The implication hung heavy between them. Sylvia had been planning for single motherhood from the beginning, methodically preparing to raise his children without him. Why didn't you push her to tell me? Damon asked. Isabella's laugh was sharp. Because we remembered how you reacted when she brought up having kids during your marriage. Not the right time. Too many variables. Maybe in a few years, when the company stabilizes. She leaned forward, her voice intense. Sylvie wanted children desperately. Damon, she just wanted them with a partner who actually wanted them to. The words stung because they were true. During their brief marriage, every conversation about family planning had ended with Damon citing business reasons for delay, expansion into Asian markets, the FDA approval process for their new drug line, the endless series of obstacles he directed between himself and the vulnerability of fatherhood. She's upstairs now, he said quietly. Room 203. She's recovering from a C-section. Is she okay? Marcus asked, his concern immediate and genuine. Physically, yes. Emotionally, Damon ran a hand through his hair. I think she's terrified that I'm going to disappoint her again. Are you? Isabella's question was direct, challenging. I don't know. I hope not. Damon met her gaze steadily. I want to learn. I want to be present for them in ways I wasn't present for her. Something in his tone must have convinced Isabella, because her expression softened slightly. The Sylvia I know doesn't make decisions lightly. If she called you to that hospital room, it's because some part of her still believes you're capable of being the man she needs you to be. An hour later, they made their way to Sylvie's room. Damon could hear her laughter through the door. The first genuine laughter he'd heard from her since his arrival. When they entered, they found her sitting up in bed, looking more like herself, despite the hospital gown and IV line. Bella. Sylvie's face lit up at the sight of her best friend. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? Isabella moved to hug her carefully. Woman, you disappear for 3 days? Then I find your ex-husband in the NICU talking to babies I didn't know existed. I think the better question is, what are you doing? Having the most complicated week of my life, Sylvia admitted, glancing at Damon with an expression he couldn't quite read. Marcus approached the bed with his characteristic gentleness. How are you feeling, Mija? Sore, tired, overwhelmed. Sylvie's honesty was refreshing after days of careful politeness between her and Damon. But happy. They're so perfect, Marcus. Even early, even tiny. They're absolutely perfect. We saw them, Isabella said softly. They're beautiful. Lucas has your stubborn chin, and Emma has that serious expression Damon gets when he's thinking too hard. You've met them. Sylvia looked surprised. Damon introduced us, Marcus explained. Spent 20 minutes explaining their feeding schedules and development milestones. Very thorough briefing. Sylvie's eyebrows rose as she looked at Damon. You learned their feeding schedules. Jennifer's been teaching me, Damon said, feeling oddly defensive. And I've been reading about premature infant care. Did you know that kangaroo care, skin-to-skin contact, can improve their weight gain and reduce stress hormones? You've been doing research, Sylvie observed, something like wonder in her voice. It's what I do when I don't understand something. I research until I do. Isabella snorted with amusement. Some things never change. Actually, Sylvie said quietly, some things do. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway with her tablet and professional smile. Good afternoon, Sylvie. I see you have visitors. She nodded politely to Isabella and Marcus before focusing on her patient. How's the pain level today? Much better. I was thinking about walking down to see the babies again. Excellent. Movement is important for recovery. Dr. Martinez made notes on her tablet. Actually, I wanted to discuss discharge planning with you. If you continue improving at this rate, we could have you home by tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow, Damon spoke before he could stop himself. Is that safe? Mr. Vexley's C-section recovery typically requires a 3 to 4 day hospital stay for uncomplicated deliveries. Sylvie's healing beautifully. Dr. Martinez looked between them with the kind of professional neutrality that suggested she'd witnessed plenty of family dynamics. The babies, however, will need to remain in the NICU for at least another week. A week of driving back and forth, Isabella said thoughtfully. That's a lot of strain right after surgery. I'll manage, Sylvie said quickly. I always do. You don't have to manage alone, Damon heard himself say. I have a driver. I can arrange transportation whenever you need to visit them, Damon. Or I could stay closer to the hospital. There's a corporate apartment we keep 4 out-of-town executives 2 blocks away. I could coordinate my schedule with yours. Make sure you're never driving while you're still recovering. Sylvie stared at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. You want to coordinate schedules? You want to arrange transportation? Who are you and what did you do with my ex-husband? Marcus chuckled. Maybe becoming a father changes a man's priorities. Maybe, Sylvie said softly, still studying Damon's face. Or maybe it just reveals what they were supposed to be all along. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat diplomatically. I'll leave you to discuss the logistics. Sylvie, I'll check on you again this evening. After she left, an awkward silence settled over the room. Isabella and Marcus exchanged meaningful looks, and Damon realized they were witnessing something significant. Not just his introduction to fatherhood, but the tentative rebuilding of trust between him and Sylvie. The corporate apartment, Sylvie said finally. It has more than one bedroom. It's a 3-bedroom unit, fully furnished. Damon felt his heart rate accelerate. You and the babies could stay there when they're discharged, closer to the hospital if there are any complications, and he trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. And we could try to figure out how to be parents together. And I could try to prove I'm not the same man who disappointed you. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, I could earn a second chance at the family I was too stupid to appreciate the first time. And Sylvie prompted, and I could learn to change diapers without supervision. He finished lamely. Isabella burst into laughter. Oh my God, you really are terrified. Completely, Damon admitted. But I'm more terrified of missing this than I am of failing at it. Sylvie was quiet for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching his face for something he hoped she would find. Okay, she said finally. We'll try the apartment temporarily until they're stable and I'm recovered enough to manage on my own. It wasn't a declaration of love or forgiveness, but it was a chance. And for now, that felt like everything. The corporate apartment on East 68th Street felt like a museum, all sleek lines, neutral colors, and furniture that looked expensive but unlived in. Damon stood in the master bedroom, watching Sylvie slowly unpack the small duffel bag Isabella had brought from her Brooklyn apartment. She moved carefully, still tender from surgery, but with the determined efficiency he remembered from their marriage. The closet's bigger than my entire bedroom back home, she observed, hanging up a simple cardigan next to his collection of tailored suits. You can rearrange anything you want, move furniture, change the art, whatever makes you comfortable. Damon felt oddly nervous in his own company's space. I had the kitchen stocked with basics, but if there's anything specific you need, Damon. Sylvie turned to face him, her expression gentle but firm. You don't have to manage every detail of my existence. I'm not a hostile takeover. The business metaphor made him wheezy because it hit too close to home. Managing, controlling, optimizing, those were his default responses to uncertainty. But standing in this sterile apartment with his ex-wife, waiting to bring home babies, he was still learning to love. He realized how inadequate those tools were for real life. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Any of this. I know how to run a company, negotiate deals, solve problems with data and strategy. But this, he gestured helplessly around the room. I have no framework for this. Sylvie sat carefully on the edge of the bed, studying his face with that perceptive gaze that had always seen through his professional facades. Do you remember our third date? The question caught him off guard. The art gallery opening. The power went out halfway through the evening. All those important people standing around in the dark, completely helpless because their perfectly planned event had been disrupted. Sylvie smiled at the memory. Everyone was frustrated, complaining, demanding solutions. But I found the emergency lighting controls, Damon said, remembering. No, before that, you started talking to Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who was scared and disoriented in the dark. You stayed with her, made sure she was safe, helped her find her granddaughter. Sylvie's voice was soft. You were kind, Damon, not because it was strategic or beneficial, but because it was right. He'd forgotten that moment entirely, but now it came back in vivid detail. The way Mrs. Chen's hand had trembled in his. How relieved she'd been when he'd simply stayed close until the lights returned. That's the man I married, Sylvie continued, not the CEO, or the pharmaceutical king, or the guy who could buy this entire building, just the man who noticed when someone needed help and offered it without thinking about what he'd get in return. And then, I forgot how to be that man. You didn't forget. You just got busy. There was sadness in her voice, but not bitterness. Success has a way of convincing us that the things that made us successful are the only things that matter. Before Damon could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer at the NICU. Lucas pulled out his feeding tube during the night. He's fine, but Dr. Phillips wants to discuss next steps. Hospital? Sylvia asked, reading his expression. Lucas had a minor setback, nothing serious, but they want to talk to us. The word felt natural now, automatic. Somehow, over the past 4 days, he'd stopped thinking of himself as a visitor to this situation and started thinking of himself as a participant. The drive to Mount C was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet rather than the tense silences that had characterized their marriage. Sylvie sat in the passenger seat of his Tesla, watching the city pass by with thoughtful eyes. Can I ask you something? She said as they waited at a red light. Anything. The night I left. Why didn't you come after me? The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd replayed that night countless times over the past 7 months, always arriving at the same painful conclusion. Because you were right, he said quietly about everything. I was putting work first, treating our marriage like another project to manage rather than a relationship to nurture. And deep down, I knew that if I chased after you, I'd just be asking you to accept less than you deserved. So, you let me go. I let you go because I thought it was the kindest thing I could do. I thought you'd be happier without me. He pulled into the hospital parking garage, but made no move to get out of the car. I was probably right, wasn't I? These past 7 months, you built a whole life, career you love, friends who support you, independence you'd never had with me. Sylvie was quiet for a long moment. I was happier in some ways, she said finally. More myself, more confident in my own choices, but I was also lonely, not all the time, and not in ways that anyone else could fix. But sometimes I'd read something interesting or see something funny, and my first instinct was still to tell you about it. She smiled sadly. 7 months and I still reached for my phone to text you before remembering we don't do that anymore. The admission created an ache in his chest that he'd been trying to ignore for months. I kept drafts of messages I never sent, updates about the company, articles I thought you'd find interesting, pictures of places we'd talked about visiting. What kind of places? That little bookstore cafe in Edinburgh you wanted to see, the Butterfly Conservatory in Costa Rica, the Northern Lights. He laughed softly. I actually booked a trip to Iceland 3 months ago, then cancelled it. Because I couldn't imagine going without you. You hate the cold. I hate a lot of things that seemed less important when I imagined experiencing them with you. They sat in the parking garage in comfortable silence, processing confessions that felt too important and too fragile for the sterile environment around them. We should go see Lucas, Sylvie said finally. Yes, we should. But neither of them moved to get out of the car. Damon, Sylvie said quietly. What are we doing here? Really, I don't know, he admitted. I know I want to be present for Lucas and Emma. I know I want to support you however I can. Beyond that, he turned to face her fully. I'm hoping we figure it out as we go. That's not very characteristic of you. Usually, you have a 5-year plan by now. Maybe becoming a father is teaching me that some things can't be planned. He reached over and took her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. Maybe it's teaching me that the best things in life require faith instead of strategy. Sylvie looked down at their joined hands, his large and slightly rough from nervous energy, hers small and soft, despite the calluses from physical therapy work. Okay, she said, faith instead of strategy. But if Lucas really did pull out his feeding tube, we should probably go see what kind of trouble our son is getting into. Our son, the casual way she said it made something warm unfurl in his chest. In the NICU, they found Lucas looking remarkably pleased with himself for a baby who'd spent the night causing medical drama. Dr. Phillips explained that pulling out feeding tubes was actually a positive sign. It suggested Lucas was developing the reflexes and coordination typical of full-term babies. He's ahead of schedule, the doctor explained, checking Lucas's chart. We might be able to try bottle feeding earlier than expected, and Emma's showing similar progress. Bottle feeding, Damon repeated, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Don't worry, Jennifer said with a knowing smile. We'll teach you everything you need to know. Feeding premature babies is an art form, but you'll get the hang of it. as if summoned by their conversation. Emma chose that moment to wake up and announce her hunger, with a surprisingly strong cry for such a tiny person. Jennifer prepared a special bottle and demonstrated the feeding technique, then handed it to Sylvie. Your turn, Mom. Watching Sylvie feed their daughter was like watching magic. Emma settled immediately in her mother's arms, tiny hands grasping at Sylvie's fingers while she ate. Sylvie's face was soft with wonder and love, and Damon realized this was what he'd been missing all along. Not just the mechanics of parenthood, but the profound intimacy of caring for someone who depended on you completely. Would you like to try with Lucas? Jennifer asked him. Damon's hands shook slightly as he accepted the bottle and settled into the rocking chair next to Lucas's incubator. But when his son was placed in his arms, something clicked into place. Lucas looked up at him with those serious dark eyes, and Damon felt the last of his reservations dissolve. Hello, son, he whispered. Let's figure this out together. And for the first time since walking into that hospital room 5 days ago, Damon Vexley felt like he might actually know what he was doing. 3 weeks later, Damon's carefully reconstructed world came crashing down with a single phone call. He was in the NICU's family room, assembling a breast pump, while Sylvie napped in the nearby recliner. Lucas and Emma had been cleared for discharge the following day, and the apartment was finally ready. Cribs assembled, monitors installed, enough diapers to supply a small army. For the first time since becoming a father, Damon felt like he had everything under control. His phone buzzed. Richard Blackstone. The name alone made his stomach clench. I need to take this, he murmured to Sylvie, who was stirring awake. Damon Blackstone's voice was crisp, predatory. I hope you've enjoyed your little sabbatical, but playtime is over. Richard Blackstone was the CEO of Meridian Industries, Damon's biggest competitor, and until recently, a grudging business ally. They'd been circling each other for years, two apex predators in the pharmaceutical industry who maintained a careful donut through mutual respect and shared enemies. Richard, what can I do for you? It's what I can do for you. Actually, I'm calling as a courtesy, professional to professional. Tomorrow morning, I'm announcing Meridian's acquisition of your European distribution network. The words hit Damon like ice water. That's impossible. My European contracts were negotiated by your CFO while you've been, shall we say, distracted. Clever man, Trevor Walsh, ambitious, too. He reached out to me 3 weeks ago with a very interesting proposition. Trevor, Damon's protege, the brilliant young executive he'd been grooming as his eventual successor. The man he'd trusted to handle operations while he learned to be a father. You're lying, am I? Check your email. Damon. Trevor's resignation letter should have arrived about 5 minutes ago, along with some very interesting documents about your company's financial vulnerabilities. Did you know that Pharmaceuticals is operating at a 60% debt-to-equity ratio? Fascinating reading. Damon's hand tightened on the phone. 60% was unsustainable, the kind of ratio that could trigger bankruptcy proceedings if their creditors lost confidence. What do you want, Richard? What I've always wanted. Vexley Pharmaceuticals, your research, your patents, your manufacturing facilities. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous acquisition package. Enough to pay off your debts and leave you with a comfortable retirement. And if I refuse, then Trevor's documents become public knowledge. Your stock price crashes, and I acquire your assets in bankruptcy court for pennies on the dollar. Blackstone's voice was smooth as silk. This way, you maintain some dignity. You can even spin it as a strategic merger if you're clever about the press release. I need time to consider. You have until tomorrow afternoon. After that, the offer expires and my lawyers file the paperwork to freeze your assets pending investigation of financial irregularities. Blackstone paused, and when he spoke again, his tone carried mock sympathy. I'm sorry, the timing is inconvenient. I heard, congratulations are in order. Twins, I believe. Such a shame when family responsibilities interfere with business judgment. The line went dead, leaving Damon staring at his phone in stunned silence. In the space of 5 minutes, everything he'd built over 15 years had crumbled to dust. Damon, Sylvia was sitting up in the recliner, her expression concerned. What's wrong? He opened his laptop with shaking fingers, pulling up his email. Trevor's resignation was there, along with financial documents that painted a devastating picture of his company's instability. While Damon had been learning to change diapers and reading bedtime stories to premature babies, Trevor had been systematically undermining the business from within. Damon, you're scaring me. What happened? I'm being forced out of my own company. His voice sounded hollow, disconnected. 15 years of work and I'm losing everything because I wasn't paying attention. Sylvie moved to sit beside him, scanning the documents on his screen. As a physical therapist, she didn't understand all the financial terminology, but she could read the devastation in his expression. "Explain it to me," she said quietly. "In simple terms, my CFO has been feeding information to my biggest competitor while I've been here. They've structured a hostile takeover, and I have less than 24 hours to either sell to them at a fraction of my company's worth, or watch them destroy it completely." Damon closed the laptop and buried his face in his hands. "I built that company from nothing, Sylvie. It was my entire identity for so long that I forgot how to be anything else. Is there anything you can do? Any way to fight back? Not without abandoning everything else." Damon looked toward the NICU, where Lucas and Emma were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their father's world was imploding. "If I wanted to save the company, I'd need to spend the next 6 months in boardrooms and courtrooms, flying between New York and Geneva and Tokyo, rebuilding relationships and restructuring debt. I'd need to become the man I was before, the one who put business above everything else. The man who put business above everything else, including family, including her." Sylvie was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "And if you don't fight, then I lose the company, but I keep." He gestured helplessly around the room. "This, whatever this is that we're building. So you have to choose. Yes, between your life's work and your children. Between my life's work and my children." Damon's voice was bitter with irony. "Perfect timing, isn't it? Just when I finally figure out what really matters, the universe decides to test my commitment." Through the glass wall of the NICU, they could see Jennifer checking on the babies. Lucas was awake, his tiny fist pressed against the transparent wall as if reaching for them. Emma slept peacefully, her breathing steady and strong. "What does your gut tell you to do?" Sylvia asked. "My gut tells me to fight, to crush Blackstone and Trevor and anyone else who thinks they can steal what I built." Damon's jaw tightened with familiar aggression. "My gut tells me that losing my company is like losing a piece of my soul and your heart." Damon looked at her, really looked. Sylv's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. Her clothes were rumpled from sleeping in hospital chairs, and there were stress lines around her eyes from weeks of worry about premature babies. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "My heart tells me that I already lost my soul once before," he said quietly. "When I chose business over you, when I convinced myself that success and love were the same thing. They're not the same thing. No. Success is what you build. When you're afraid to risk what you really want." Damon reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Love is what you choose when you finally get brave enough to stop building walls." Sylvie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let them have the company, Damon. I'm going to let them have the buildings and the patents and the profit margins and all the things I thought defined me." His voice grew stronger with each word. "And I'm going to choose the family I was too scared to choose the first time. But if you lose everything, I won't lose everything." Damon stood up and moved to the NICU window, watching his children sleep. "I'll lose a company. I'll keep the people who actually matter. What will you do for work? For money? I don't know yet. Start over, maybe. Find a way to use my experience that doesn't require sacrificing everything else." He turned back to her, and for the first time in weeks, his smile was genuinely peaceful. "I spent 15 years building something that could be stolen in a single phone call. Maybe it's time to build something that can't be taken away." Sylvia joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could smell her shampoo. Something simple and clean that reminded him of Sunday mornings during their brief marriage. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Really sure, because once you make this choice, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And as he said it, Damon realized it was true. The panic and rage were fading, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. The freedom that came from finally knowing what mattered most. Tomorrow he would lose his empire, but tonight he would go home to the woman he loved and the children who had saved him from a life he'd never realized was empty. For the first time in his adult life, that felt like the better deal. The first night in the apartment with Lucas and Emma felt like entering an alternate universe where time moved differently. Every sound, a tiny whimper, the soft rustle of movement, even their own breathing, seemed amplified in the quiet space. Damon found himself checking on them every 20 minutes, convinced that something catastrophic would happen the moment he looked away. "They're fine," Sylvie said gently from the nursery doorway. watching him hover over Emma's crib for the fourth time in an hour. Babies sleep a lot. It's what they do. But what if, Damon? She moved beside him, her voice patient but firm. You can't protect them from everything by watching them constantly. Sometimes parenting requires faith that they're stronger than they look. He knew she was right, but letting go of the hypervigilance felt impossible. For 15 years, his success had depended on anticipating problems, controlling variables, managing outcomes. The idea that some things simply had to be trusted rather than supervised went against every instinct he'd developed. His phone had been buzzing intermittently all evening. Calls from board members, investors, business journalists who'd gotten wind of the Meridian situation. He'd turned off the ringer after the sixth call from his lawyer, but the silent vibrations felt like ghosts rattling chains. You should answer them, Sylvie said, noticing his tension. Handle whatever needs handling. No. Damon's voice was firm. I made my choice. Let them figure out how to spin it without me. At midnight, Lucas woke hungry and indignant about it. Damon warmed a bottle while Sylvie changed his diaper, and they settled into the living room for what Jennifer had warned them would become a familiar routine. Night feeding, in the soft glow of a table lamp while the rest of the world slept. Do you regret it? Sylvia asked quietly, watching Damon feed their son with increasing confidence. The decision about the company. I regret that it took me so long to make it. Damon adjusted Lucas's position, marveling at how natural the movements were becoming. I keep thinking about something you said during our marriage, that I treated everything like a transaction instead of a relationship. You did, including us. I thought if I provided financial security and stability, that was the same as providing love and attention. He looked up at her, sitting cross-legged on the couch in pajamas and a cardigan, looking impossibly young and beautiful. I never understood that you can't delegate emotional intimacy to a bank account. Sylvie was quiet for a moment, processing his words. What changed your mind about everything? Seeing you in that hospital bed, realizing that you'd carried our children for 9 months, gone through labor and surgery, made 1,000 decisions about their care, all while I was completely oblivious. Damon's voice grew thick with emotion. I missed everything that mattered because I was so focused on things that didn't. Then work mattered, too, Damon. Your research has helped thousands of people. The medications you've developed, the treatments you funded, that's important work. Important work that someone else can do. But being their father, he looked down at Lucas, who was watching him with those serious dark eyes. No one else can do that. No one else can be present for the moments that matter, or teach them how to be kind, or show them what it means to choose love over fear. Emma chose that moment to wake up, her soft cry echoing from the nursery. Sylvie started to get up, but Damon gently transferred Lucas to her arms. Let me, he said. I want to learn how to handle them both. In the nursery, Emma was working herself up to a proper tantrum, her tiny face red with indignation. Damon lifted her carefully, supporting her head the way Jennifer had taught him, and began the gentle bouncing motion that seemed to soothe her. Hey, beautiful girl, he murmured. What's all this fuss about? Emma's crying gradually subsided as he walked her around the room, pointing out the mobile above her crib, the soft paintings on the walls, the city lights visible through the window. See that out there? That's New York City. Someday when you're bigger, we'll explore it together. I'll show you the park where your mom and I had our first picnic, and the museum where she lectured me about the ethics of pharmaceutical pricing. He smiled at the memory. She was right, by the way. She's right about most things, not everything, Sylvie said from the doorway, having overheard his last comment. No. What are you wrong about? I was wrong about you, about whether you could change, whether you wanted to. She moved into the room, settling into the rocking chair with Lucas. I thought you were too set in your ways, too invested in being the person your success had made you. I thought choosing work over family was just who you were. It was who I was for a long time, but not who you wanted to be. Damon considered the question seriously, still swaying gently with Emma in his arms. I think I was afraid to want to be anything else. Building the company, making money, accumulating success, those were concrete, measurable goals. I could control them, predict them, manage them, and love. Love was terrifying because it required trusting that someone would choose to stay. Even when I wasn't perfect, even when I failed, even when I couldn't fix or solve or manage whatever was wrong, he looked at her directly. Love required believing I was enough just as I was, not because of what I could provide or achieve. And now I know that love isn't about being enough. It's about choosing to grow, choosing to show up, choosing to be present for the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of sharing your life with someone else. Emma had fallen asleep again in his arms, her breathing slow and peaceful. It's about choosing connection over control. Sylvie was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the soft light from the hallway. These past few weeks, watching you with them, seeing how hard you've worked to learn everything about their care. It's like meeting you for the first time. Maybe you are. Maybe I'm finally becoming the man I should have been all along. Or maybe, Sylvie said softly, you're becoming the man you were before you convinced yourself that achievement was more important than joy. They sat in comfortable silence, each holding a sleeping baby, processing the magnitude of how much their lives had changed in less than a month. The apartment felt different now, not like a corporate housing unit, but like a home lived in, loved in, real. Damon, Sylvie said eventually, what happens now with us? I mean, it was the question he'd been avoiding, the conversation they'd been dancing around since the day she'd told him he was a father. Their marriage had ended for good reasons, but those reasons felt distant now, almost irrelevant compared to the family they were building together. I don't know, he admitted. I know I want to be part of their lives every day. I know I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. Beyond that, he shrugged helplessly. I'm making this up as I go along. That's very unlike you. Everything about this is unlike me. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd give up my company to change diapers and read bedtime stories, I'd have had them committed. Damon smiled, looking down at Emma's peaceful face. Turns out some of the best decisions can't be made with spreadsheets and market analysis. Just with your heart. Just with your heart. Sylvie stood up carefully, still cradling Lucas. Come on. Let's put them back to bed and get some sleep ourselves. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Why tomorrow? Because tomorrow we wake up as a family and figure out what that means. She paused at the nursery door, looking back at him with an expression that was equal parts hope and uncertainty. And because tomorrow, you start your new life as a man who chose love over everything else. As they settled the babies back in their cribs and made their way to their separate bedrooms, Damon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation for an unknown future. For the first time, not having a plan felt like freedom rather than failure. And when he fell asleep an hour later, it was to the sound of his children breathing peacefully in the next room, and the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. 2 weeks into their new routine, Sylvie was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make this work. Damon had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for corporate mergers, learning everything from sleep schedules to infant CPR with meticulous dedication. Watching him sing off-key lullabies to Emma at 3 o'clock in the morning, or research organic baby food recipes had become her favorite form of entertainment, which is why the woman standing at their apartment door felt like a sledgehammer to her carefully constructed sense of security. Hello, Sylvie. Victoria Sterling smiled with perfectly white teeth that had never needed orthodontics. She was tall, elegant, and expensively dressed in a way that screamed old money and exclusive boarding schools. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a flawless bob, and her emerald green eyes assessed Sylvie with the kind of cool calculation that suggested she was accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? Sylvia kept her hand on the doorframe, blocking the entrance to the apartment where Lucas and Emma were napping. Victoria Sterling, I'm Damon. She paused delicately. Well, I suppose former fiancé is the most accurate term, though we've remained close friends. Former fiancé. The words hit Sylvia like ice water. In 3 years of marriage and months of divorce proceedings, Damon had never mentioned being engaged to anyone before her. I'm afraid Damon's not here right now, Sylvie said carefully. He's at a job interview. Oh, I know. That's actually why I'm here. Victoria's smile widened. May I come in? What I have to say concerns you as much as it concerns him. Against her better judgment, Sylvie stepped aside. Victoria moved through the apartment with the confidence of someone who belonged in expensive spaces, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors. She paused at the nursery door, peering in at the sleeping babies with an expression that was impossible to read. They're beautiful, she said, though something in her tone suggested the compliment was obligatory rather than genuine. Damon always said he didn't want children. People change, do they? Victoria turned back to Sylvie with that calculating smile. In my experience, people simply reveal who they've always been underneath the pretenses. Sylvia gestured toward the living room, wanting to get this conversation away from her sleeping children. What exactly did you want to discuss? Victoria settled gracefully onto the couch, crossing her legs and smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. I wanted to talk to you about Damon's current situation, his financial difficulties. I'm not sure that's any of your business. Actually, it is. You see, I represent the Sterling Foundation, my family's philanthropic organization. We've been following the Meridian situation with great interest. Victoria opened her designer handbag and withdrew a leather portfolio. We're prepared to offer Damon a very generous opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Biomedical Research, full autonomy over research and development, unlimited funding for projects he deems worthy, and a compensation package that would make his Vexley Pharmaceutical salary look like pocket change. Victoria slid the portfolio across the coffee table. All he has to do is relocate to Geneva, where our primary research facility is located. Geneva, halfway around the world from the life they were building, from the family they were learning to be. Why would you offer him that? Sylvia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because Damon is brilliant. His research on neurological disorders has been groundbreaking, and his business acumen is unparalleled. He's exactly the kind of visionary leader we need to take Sterling Biomedical to the next level. Victoria's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained calculating. And because I believe he deserves better than this. She gestured around the apartment at the baby bottles drying in the kitchen, the bouncy seats in the living room, the general chaos of new parenthood that had transformed the sterile corporate space into something lived in and real. This Sylvie's voice was carefully controlled, domestic mediocrity playing house with an ex-wife and babies that tie him down just when he should be reaching his full potential. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Sylvie, I'm going to be direct because I think you're intelligent enough to appreciate honesty. Damon is going through a crisis right now, losing his company, feeling displaced and uncertain about his identity. It's natural that he'd cling to the first thing that makes him feel needed and important again. You think that's what this is? Some kind of rebound situation? I think he's a man who's always defined himself by his achievements, and suddenly, he has no achievements left except being a father to children he never planned to have. Victoria's voice was gentle but ruthless. How long do you think it will be before the novelty wears off? Before he starts resenting the limitations, the sleepless nights, the complete loss of the freedom that allowed him to build an empire? The words struck exactly at the fears Sylvie had been trying to suppress. In her darkest moments, usually during the 4 a.m. feedings, when exhaustion made everything seem impossible, she'd wondered the same thing. How long before Damon realized that fatherhood was a relentless, often thankless job that offered none of the validation or recognition he'd spent his adult life pursuing? He chose this, Sylvie said quietly. He chose it in a moment of emotional upheaval. But when the dust settles and he has time to really consider what he's given up, Victoria shrugged elegantly. The Sterling offer provides him with a way to have both meaningful work that utilizes his talents and enough financial security to support his children generously from a distance. From a distance, Sylvie, be realistic. You're a physical therapist from Brooklyn. You have a good life, stable work, friends who care about you. Why would you want to trap a man like Damon in a situation that makes all of you miserable? Take the settlement he'll undoubtedly offer. Raise your children in the environment where you're most comfortable, and let him return to the world where he belongs. And where do you fit into this scenario? For the first time, Victoria's composure slipped slightly, revealing something hungrier underneath the polished exterior. Damon and I have unfinished business. We were engaged for 2 years before he got distracted by his company's expansion. We never stopped caring for each other. He married me. He married you during a very specific phase of his life when he was trying to prove he could balance personal relationships with professional ambition. When that experiment failed, he went back to what he knew best: work. Victoria's smile was sharp now, predatory. This current phase will fail too, Sylvie. The question is whether you want to be collateral damage when it does. Before Sylvia could respond, they heard Damon's key in the lock. Victoria immediately straightened, smoothing her already perfect hair and arranging her expression into something welcoming and warm. Victoria. Damon's voice carried complete shock as he entered the living room. What are you doing here? Hello, darling. Victoria rose gracefully and moved to embrace him, pressing a kiss to his cheek that lingered just a moment too long. I was in the city on foundation business and thought I'd stop by to see how you're adjusting. Damon's eyes found Sylvie over Victoria's shoulder, and she saw confusion and something that might have been guilt in his expression. He'd never mentioned Victoria, not during their marriage, not during the divorce, not once in the weeks since becoming a father. Sylvie, this is Victoria Sterling. He paused, searching for words. I was just telling Sylvia about our history, Victoria said smoothly, returning to her seat, and about the exciting opportunity the Sterling Foundation wants to offer you. Opportunity? Damon looked between them, clearly trying to read the undercurrents in the room. CEO position at Sterling Biomed Geneva, unlimited research funding. Victoria's voice was professionally enthusiastic, but her eyes never left Damon's face. Everything you've ever wanted, darling. Everything you deserve. Damon was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Sylvia watched his expression carefully, looking for signs of temptation, of the ambitious hunger that had once driven him to success. That's very generous, he said finally, but I'm not interested. Don't decide immediately, Victoria said quickly. Think about it. Consider what this could mean for your career, your research, your future. Consider what you're giving up by staying here. I'm not giving up anything by staying here. Damon's voice was firm, certain. I'm gaining everything that actually matters. Victoria's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. The offer stands, Damon. When you're ready to reclaim your real life, call me. She gathered her portfolio and handbag with fluid grace, then paused at the door. Sylvie, it was lovely meeting you. I hope you'll think about what we discussed. Her tone was cordial, but her eyes held a promise that this wasn't over. After she left, silence settled over the apartment like a heavy blanket. Damon sat heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair. How long were you engaged to her? Sylvia asked quietly. 2 years. It ended 6 months before I met you. Damon looked up at her, with obvious discomfort. I should have mentioned her before. We haven't spoken in years. I thought that part of my life was completely behind me. She seems to think otherwise. Sylvie, whatever she said to you, she offered you everything. Damon, your career back. Unlimited resources, the kind of life you've built before. And she offered it without the complications of midnight feedings and diaper changes and all the messy realities of family life. And you think I want that? Sylvia looked at him. Really, looked at the man who'd given up an empire to learn how to swaddle babies, at the father who'd spent the morning researching entry-level positions at biotech startups because he wanted to rebuild his career in a way that allowed him to be present for his children. No, she said finally, I don't think you want that. But I think she's going to keep trying to convince you that you do. Let her try. Damon reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Sylvie, I chose this life. I chose you. I chose them. And I'm going to keep choosing us every day, until you believe that I mean it. From the nursery came the soft sound of Emma waking from her nap, ready for attention and probably a bottle. As Damon stood to go to her, Sylvie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Victoria Sterling wasn't going away, and something told her that this was only the beginning. The photographs arrived on a Thursday morning while Damon was at his second interview with Meridian Therapeutics, a small biotech startup that had offered him a research director position at a tenth of his former salary. Sylvie found the manila envelope slipped under their door, her name written in elegant script across the front. Inside were a dozen professional photographs, spanning what appeared to be several years. Damon and Victoria at charity galas, their arms around each other with the casual intimacy of a long-established couple. Damon and Victoria on what looked like a Mediterranean yacht, both tanned and laughing at some private joke. Damon and Victoria at what was clearly an engagement party, her left hand prominently displaying a diamond that dwarfed anything Sylvie had ever owned. But it was the last photograph that made Sylvie's hands shake. Damon and Victoria, in what appeared to be a hotel room, caught in an intimate embrace. The timestamp in the corner read, just 8 months ago, 1 month before Damon and Sylvie's divorce was finalized. A single note was paperclipped to the back. Some habits are harder to break than others. Ask him about Prague the 5th. Sylvie sank onto the couch, staring at the image that seemed to mock everything she'd begun to believe about Damon's transformation. 8 months ago, while she'd been struggling through her first trimester alone, convinced that she was protecting her unborn children from a father who didn't want them, Damon had been in Prague with his ex-fiancée. The front door opened just as she was shoving the photographs back into the envelope. How did the interview go? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Better than expected. They're interested in my neurological research, and they're willing to let me work flexible hours. Damon's excitement was obvious as he moved toward the kitchen. The salary is not much, but it's a start, and Dr. Kim, she's the founder, she actually has twin boys herself, so she understands the whole work-life balance thing. That's wonderful. Sylvie kept the envelope behind her back. torn between confronting him immediately and waiting until she could process what she'd seen. "You don't sound like you think it's wonderful." Damon stopped in the kitchen doorway, studying her expression with the kind of attention that had made him successful in business negotiations. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm just tired." Emma was up half the night with gas. It wasn't entirely a lie. Emma had been fussy, but it wasn't the truth either. Damon's eyes narrowed slightly, and Sylvie realized he could read her tells as easily as she could read his. "Sylvie, what happened while I was gone?" Before she could answer, Lucas started crying from the nursery. The kind of escalating wail that suggested he was working up to a full meltdown. Damon immediately headed toward the sound, and Sylvia used the distraction to hide the envelope in her bedroom. For the rest of the day, she moved through their routine like an actress playing a role. She fed Emma and Lucas. She laughed at Damon's terrible jokes. She listened to him read financial projections from his potential new employer with enthusiasm that felt increasingly hollow. But every time she looked at him, she saw that hotel room photograph. Every time he touched her hand or smiled at her with genuine warmth, she wondered if he was thinking about Victoria. Every time he talked about their future together, she wondered if he was simply biding his time until a better opportunity, professional or personal, presented itself. By evening, the strain was showing. She was shorter with him than usual, distracted during dinner, and when he suggested watching a movie together after the babies were asleep, she claimed exhaustion and retreated to her bedroom. She was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when she heard the soft knock on her door. "Sylvie, can we talk?" She considered pretending to be asleep, but the gentle persistence in his voice told her he wasn't going to give up easily. "Come in." Damon entered, carrying 2 cups of tea, offering her one as he sat carefully on the edge of her bed. In the soft light from her bedside lamp, he looked tired and concerned, but also determined. "I know something's wrong," he said without preamble. "You've been different since I got back from the interview. Distant, whatever it is, I'd rather deal with it directly than pretend everything's fine when it obviously isn't." Sylvie sat up against her pillows, accepting the tea, but not drinking it. "Do you remember Prague?" The question hit him like a physical blow. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his jaw tighten with what looked like guilt and regret. "Victoria told you about Prague." "Victoria showed me." Sylvia reached into her nightstand drawer and withdrew the envelope, pulling out the hotel room photograph. "This is from 8 months ago, Damon, while I was pregnant and alone, dealing with morning sickness and trying to figure out how I was going to raise twins by myself." Damon took the photograph with shaking hands, staring at it as if he could make it disappear through sheer force of will. "It's not what it looks like," he said quietly. "Really, because what it looks like is you having an affair with your ex-fiancé while your wife was carrying your children. We weren't married 8 months ago. We'd been divorced for months. Technically divorced, but emotionally." Sylvie's voice was sharp with hurt. "I was still your wife in every way that mattered. I was still carrying your children, still hoping we could find a way back to each other." "Sylvie, were you sleeping with her?" The question came out rawer than she'd intended, but she needed to know. "During our separation, during the divorce proceedings after, were you sleeping with Victoria?" Damon was quiet for a long time, and his silence was answer enough. "Yes," he said finally. "Not during our marriage. Never during our marriage. But after you left, when I was angry and hurt and convinced that our divorce proved I was incapable of sustaining a real relationship. Yes, I called Victoria because she was safe, because she was familiar, because being with her didn't require me to examine why I'd failed as a husband or consider what I needed to change about myself." Damon set the photograph on the nightstand and looked at her directly. "Because she never challenged me the way you did. And Prague was supposed to be closure. She'd been pushing for us to get back together, and I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was better suited for the kind of relationship that didn't require emotional vulnerability or real intimacy." His voice was heavy with "It lasted one night before I realized I was trying to settle for a connection that felt like settling." "What changed your mind?" "I woke up next to her and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no contentment, no sense of coming home. Just emptiness." Damon reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "I realized I'd rather be alone and hoping for something real than with someone and accepting something hollow. And then you found out about the babies, and then I found out about the babies and realized I'd been given a second chance I didn't deserve." His voice broke slightly. "Sylvia, I know how this looks. I know. Victoria showing you these photographs makes everything I've said and done over the past few weeks seem like manipulation or calculation, but I swear to you, my feelings for you, my commitment to our family. None of that has anything to do with Victoria or Prague, or the man I was when I was running from the truth about what I really wanted, which is you. This life, this family, this beautiful, complicated, exhausting, perfect reality we've built together. Damon's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've given you every reason to doubt my sincerity. But I'm asking you to believe that the man who chose you and Lucas and Emma over everything else is real. Even if the man who went to Prague with Victoria was real, too. Sylvia looked at the photograph again, at the intimate embrace, the hotel room, the timestamp that represented one of the lowest points in her life. Then she looked at Damon, sitting on her bed in pajama pants and a t-shirt that had spit up stains on the shoulder. His hair disheveled from a day of chasing after toddler twins, his eyes full of love and desperation and hope. I want to believe you, she said quietly, but I'm scared that Victoria is right, that this domestic life will lose its appeal when you remember what it feels like to be powerful and successful and desired by women who don't have stretch marks and baby weight and exhaustion written all over their faces. Sylvie, I'm scared that when the novelty of fatherhood wears off, you'll realize that I'm exactly what I've always been, a middle-class physical therapist from Brooklyn, who wanted a simple life with a man who loved her enough to choose her over everything else.